Thank you very much for enabling me to join your community this morning. I'm Dave Howell, and as Veronica said, I'm a professor at the Milwaukee School of Engineering. And this presentation is based on a book that just released about 2 weeks ago. So I'm really excited to share the message of this book with all of you. Okay, trying to figure out how to move my slides. There we are. So I teach a number of courses at MSOE, and as Veronica mentioned, one of them is an ethics course. And MSOE was generous enough to give me a faculty development grant so that I could write a textbook for this class. I've taught the course for maybe a decade now, and I've never really found a textbook that I get excited about, because most of the textbooks are rooted in Western philosophical perspectives, and my theoretical underpinnings swing more to Eastern philosophy. So whereas in the Western tradition stemming from the Greeks, there's a lot of emphasis placed on truth, I'm much more interested in what is the good. And I'll try to jump into some of that later, but this presentation has a little bit of a chronology to it. So imagine it's a year ago, I received this grant and I'm starting to do some research so that I can write a book on ethics. Well, then everything explodes, right? The pandemic kicks into full gear. George Floyd was killed in St. Paul, not far from where my daughter Kate lives. Lots of social unrest across the country. This photograph on the left was in Portland, Oregon, where my son lives. There was all of the presidential hoo-ha going on this summer. And I was really stressed out. I think everyone around me was experiencing a great deal of anxiety as a result of what was going on this summer. Even looking at these images conjures back a lot of emotion. So there were two things going on in my head last summer. One was, what am I going to write about when I write about this book for my ethics class? And how am I going to navigate these arduous times with all of this stuff going on around me, around everyone? So I gave a lot of thought to the B.O.B, or the bench of bliss. About 20 years ago, my wife and I, whenever we go for walks, we would start recognizing these benches. I'm sure you see them all over the place, right? You go to a park, you're on a bike ride, and you'll see benches. And we tend to call the really good ones a bench of bliss. This is a picture of my wife, who's actually in the call right now. Last week, we were up at Door County. So she found a B.O.B and she's sitting down, just kind of taking in Lake Michigan. And the whole purpose of B.O.B is that you sit down as long as you possibly can, but it's difficult because, you know, you're usually on a walk or you're on a bike ride and you keep moving. That's why I find great irony that I see these benches all the time, but I rarely see somebody sitting on one of them. I was also thinking about a book that I read that I'm very familiar with, very fond of, Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I was talking about this book with my daughter Kate, who's also on the call right now. And we were doing a big bike ride. We were in Washington State, and I asked her, you know, what really resonated for her in this book, and she shared this passage with me, and I just want to read it out loud. Peace of mind produces right values produce right thoughts produce right actions, and right actions produce work, which will be a material reflection for others to see of the serenity at the center of it all. So this passage from Pirsig's novel resonated because I do teach ethics, and ethics has a lot to do with values, and I want my students to engage in right actions, but it's just kind of difficult to use all of those words because it's language that is very abstract and kind of difficult to get your head wrapped around. I mean, of course, we have values, we value different things, but what is it exactly that we value? And those are the kind of conversations I want to have in my classes. So I created this thing called the Pirsig paradigm. I took that quote and I just kind of put it in a visual framework. So sure enough, you know, MSOE wants our students to graduate, become alumni, go out into the world and be amazing engineers and nurses and business people and UXers. But quite often all we see is the work, the results of their work really. And that's kind of that outer ring. So inside of that work, right, the service and the product that we provide for each other, our actions. We can also see how people are acting. So we talk about that as well because these two outer rings are very external. So there's evidence. We can witness what happens when we act and when we produce work as a result of our actions. But the rings keep going deeper, right? Like layers of an onion. So inside of our work and our actions are our thoughts. And I love talking with students about how we think. I don't believe most of my students have given much thought to their own thought process, which I find very ironic because, you know, school systems will teach you how to read and write. They'll teach you even how to present information publicly. But do we teach people how to think? So I'll stop periodically in my classes and we'll do a little neuropsychology once in a while just to kind of explain how the brain works and how we can manage our thought process so that we can think in a very specific way, one that could better reflect our values, which is the circle inside of thought, action, and work. So what are our values? What is it that we value? And once again, I have found historically when I teach these classes and I ask my students, you know, what do you value? And they'll maybe tell me, well, you know, I believe in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Or I'll have some students cite maybe one of the 10 commandments, you know, honor thy father and thy mother, thou shalt not steal. Oh yeah,
You
what
got
is
a
it, Veronica?
question. You got a question
What's the question?
That is, what is a non-thought from Sue?
What is non-thought? Oh yeah, okay, so non-thought is a Buddhist concept where your mind is active, but you're not focused on anything in particular. So in the West, we tend to think of like thinking or not thinking. So like right now, my brain's very active. I'm thinking really hard about the Pirsig paradigm, which I call this thing, or I'll not think. At the end of the day, we'll plug in an episode of Who's That Girl, or we'll watch an episode of The Crown, and it's just kind of a chance to unplug. But I also try to create opportunities to engage in non-thought, usually when I'm riding my bicycle or sitting on a bench of Bliss, where I am physically present, and I try to engage in a thought process where my mind is active, but not focused on anything in particular. So a good question. And actually that's kind of a prequel to some of the slides that are about to show up. So at the center of all of this, according to Robert Pirsig, would be peace of mind, serenity. And I was thinking last summer about, you know, all of the unrest, all of the cultural anxiety, all of the unknowns. I mean, back then we didn't have a vaccine. We didn't know how this thing was going to play out. The Black Lives Matter movement was so powerful, but I didn't know how to react to it. You know, as I was trying to sequester myself via the stay-at-home dictums put forward by our governor, you know, I mean, should I stay at home? Should I be involved in the activism taking place in downtown Milwaukee? I was unsure and I was troubled. And I didn't want to be. So I thought, well, with this paradigm, if I want my students to have the right values, if I want them to engage in good thought, and if I want them to act appropriately and produce good work, then maybe what I need to do is talk to them about how peace of mind is really at the heart of it. And if we cultivate our serenity, then all of these outer rings will benefit from that type of mental space that we can enact, hopefully, as much as possible, especially in times of crisis. So I began a thought experiment. I would ride my bicycle to the local parks around my house. This photograph is of a park in Cedarburg, just about 10 miles up the bike path. And I'd bring my laptop computer, maybe a book, and I would sit down at a picnic table or a bench, usually a picnic table, because I wanted to write afterwards. And then I would sit still for as long as I possibly could and try not to think about anything in particular. And I found that to be very difficult at first, simply because there was so much information I was trying to process. I mean, we were watching the news every night, and every night, there was so much information unfolding, so much taking place, and we felt overwhelmed. We talked about not watching the news, but we had to. We felt this sense of responsibility for understanding what was going on in our country, on our planet, in real time. So I was trying to balance that by enacting a habituated behavior of going to parks every day. Every day, go to a different park. Every day, sit still for as long as I possibly can. And I found that over the course of the summer, it was beginning to have an effect. It wasn't obvious to me at the beginning what that effect was, other than trying to gain a sense of perspective, especially regarding the questions and the issues that I was pondering when I was not trying to sit still in these parks. And periodically I would also go camping. I love bike camping. I'd go up to Harrington Beach, which is once again just about 13 miles north of my house. And this is a photograph of, setting up the tent. And this was maybe a month into the summer, and I was really jonesing on this sitting still stuff. So by giving myself an entire day to do this, it was more than just a bike ride to a park, and letting it be just a portion of the day. Really, it was more than that. It was an entire day of just sitting at this picnic table. And I was trying to be responsible and social distance. I didn't want to go near anyone else that was in the campground. Everyone was kind of staying in their campsites. I felt safe. But it was just, more time, more space to engage in rich, reflective thought process. That ongoing pursuit of serenity, that not an emotion so much as a state of mind. And I think it's really important to differentiate those two things, because emotions tend to be fleeting, whereas a mindset can be more of an ongoing constant, especially if one gives it a great deal of intent. So this one particular night, I was at Harrington Beach State Park, and I thought a great deal about an assignment that I have my students do, and that is having them create a moral compass for themselves. Because when they graduate, they will receive a degree in engineering, in nursing, in business, and with that academic credential, they have the ability to change the world for better or for worse. So this ethics class that they take from me is typically offered at the last quarter of their senior year. I mean, like Veronica's taking the class right now. She's about to graduate. Because we want students to understand how to best manage the responsibility they're afforded given their academic pedigree, and how they will find gainful employment. MSOE is really good at helping our students find good jobs. And I'm really excited about the position that I have at MSOE because if I can help my students find their ethos, if I can help them define what they value, then I would argue it's more likely they will be good workers. They will be good human beings. They will bring the best part of themselves to their communities, whether it's their work community, their faith community, their family community. And I feel privileged to have these conversations with them. So I asked them to draw up a list of their values, their morals and ethics, and then we start having conversations about conduct, because the whole reason why we have ethics, or guiding principles, if you will, like rules that we make for ourselves, is so that we can behave in a very specific and directed way. So we usually begin with values. Values are like single word statements. I share with them a list of about 200 different values, and I'll ask them in class, well, what are the 5 or 6 values that really call to you, that you really identify with? And we'll spend an entire class period in groups doing this kind of work. Well, pre-pandemic, since we've been teaching online, it's harder to do this, but it's still an activity that we engage in. And I'll share with them my moral compass, which is on the screen, because I value serenity, I value adventure, I value learning. And they really, these values give direction to my life, how I behave on a daily basis. Hopefully they do. But how do you build the bridge between values and conduct? Well, with ethics and with morals, these rules that we make for ourselves, so that we can behave the way that we want to behave. So, for example, with learning, I'm a passionate learner. I really want to be a passionate learner. I want to work on my intuition. I want to learn about the outdoors. So I established those values for myself under learning. And then I make certain rules for myself. So I have one ethic, what's good for Rush is good for Dave, and Rush is my dog. And I love this dog so much. I mean, my wife's my best friend, and then Rush, man, Rush is right there. He's my buddy. And I just know that, like, if we walk him a couple of times a day, if I let him have time in the backyard, if I watch just how passionate he is when he chases a squirrel or a rabbit, there's a lot to be learned from Rush. He's a very soft-spoken animal, and I really value the fact that when he speaks, it's always with great intent. I have another rule, be the bikes. I have lots of bicycles. I think I have 7 or 8. And each bike has a very specific purpose and intent. So I want to be the bicycle. I really believe in bicycle as a form of transportation, a form of entertainment, a vehicle for spending time in the outdoors, which ties into my third ethic, and that is time in the divine. I view nature not as God's creation, but as God's manifestation. So when I actually walk outside of the house or outside of the office, I experience the presence of the divine, and I'm very intentional about this, and I want to remind myself about this. So then when it comes to conduct, hopefully I'm doing these things all of the time. I am loving Rush. I am sustaining my ability to read and write and research on these topics. I'm refining my mental filters on a daily basis so that I spend more time ruminating on those things that I value. And I try to spend more time outside than inside, something that's been really challenging given the pandemic and this very cold winter that we've had. I don't tell my students that they should buy into my values and ethics. I just share this with them as an example. I will tell them that it's not my job to tell them. It's not my job to tell them what to believe or what to value. My job as their professor is to help them answer those questions for themselves. And quite often we get into some great conversations when their values and my values are at odds. But once again, it is of small consequence. What matters is that they can articulate and defend their values, their ethics, and their morals. So as the summer progressed, I was going deeper and deeper into this thought experiment, and I was realizing that this sense of spending time outside was becoming an exercise in egolessness. Once again, you know, in Buddhist philosophy, one attempts to surrender their self to the space that they're in, and in doing so, find themselves. So, you know, one of my guiding principles is A equals A if A does not equal A, and it's a paradox. And what it means is, you know, if you are not yourself, then you are yourself. So if I, like, this is the beer garden in Shorewood. I forget the name of this beer garden. It's right off the bike path. And I would go there frequently during the course of the summer. Yeah, maybe I'll have a beer once in a while, but quite often I enjoyed going there when it was empty, because there's just all of these empty picnic tables, and it's a beautiful space near the Milwaukee River, not far from the Urban Ecology Center, actually. And I would try to sit still as long as I could so that I could be so present in that space that I would lose my sense of self in the space. And so for me, this is the action that would enable me to find peace of mind and to find that sense of rest, given all of the unrest going on around me. And I also learned that it was important to rely on this sense of peace of mind, which became very evident deep into the summer when, my wife Sue got in a bike accident. She was going around a turn. She went into a shaded area. There was a pothole. She didn't see it. She went over the handlebars, broke her collarbone and her rib, lots of abrasions. And she gave me a call. She let me know that she was on her way to the hospital. I should go to the hospital. And so I went there as soon as I could. And I was sitting in the waiting room, surrounded by all these people who were in the ER because they had loved ones with COVID. And I was there for about 4 hours. It was a long 4 hours, because I didn't know what room she was in. I didn't know her condition. But what I ended up doing without really thinking about it was I stared out the window at the trees in the parking lots of the hospital. And I was just kind of watching the leaves of these deciduous trees blow in the wind. Because I had been doing that all summer long, it was kind of my default behavior when sitting down in a chair. And I realized after a couple of hours of waiting that I wasn't in a heightened state of panic and anxiety, though I probably should have been. Years ago, maybe 11 years ago, my son was hit by a car and dragged for a while, and in an ambulance and off to Children's Hospital. And Sue gave me a call and said, go to Children's Hospital. Evan's been hit by a car. And I got in my car and I started driving. And about 10 minutes into my journey, I realized I had no idea where Children's Hospital was, because I was freaking out. And by the time I got to Children's Hospital, I was useless. I was not able to be there for anyone because I had so much anxiety over what had happened. And I just didn't have perspective at that time in my life to really be there in real time. So it was interesting to sit there and kind of reflect on these two experiences that were 11 years apart. Eventually, I was able to go see Sue and find out how she was, and we spent the next 6 weeks helping her heal, which was really interesting because she was forced into sitting still, right? When you have a broken collarbone and a broken rib, it's kind of a bad combination, because you can't really sleep on your shoulder because of your rib, and you can't really sleep on your back because of the collarbone. So we just spent a lot of time sitting together, which is something that it's easy for us to do. We spent a lot of time together, whether it's having coffee or going for walks with the dog or whatever. But it was good to have that practice, that habituated behavior. I'm a big fan of habituating the kind of behavior that we want to engage in, so that what we do is merely an expression of our personality. So it was wonderful to have this thought experiment and to pursue Serenity over the course of the summer. At first, because of the social unrest. At first, because I wanted to respond to the pandemic appropriately and responsibly as a member of our society. But at the end of the day, it put me in a good space so that I could be a resource for my wife as she healed from this accident. And so in the final chapter of this book that I wrote, which was kind of the sum result of all of these trips to these parks, I thought a great deal about how, once again, from a Buddhist perspective, we try to act without acting. We try to do what we do without necessarily having to even give it much thought. And this is where I found myself at the end of August, maybe a week before I was going to have to start teaching again in the fall. This photograph is at the Mequon Nature Preserve, not far from my house. I love this bench. This is my favorite place to sit in the world. My favorite bench of bliss. I like drinking the beer when I sit still, and I was just watching the trees blow in the wind, listening to the birds singing, being present in this space, and really taking pleasure in the mindset that I had engendered over the course of the summer. In the last chapter of my book, I write that I tell my students, easy is good. And then I tell them that the hard part is learning how to do something so well that it's easy to do. So I don't think that it's easy to be serene. I think in 2021, in 2020, finding peace of mind is something that takes a great deal of intentionality. It helps to be in a community of people who value this type of mindset. But if you exercise it enough, if you pursue it on a daily basis, if you maintain yourself in such a way that you fight for this type of mindset as you go through your life, then it does become easier and easier. And as a result, you not only impact your existence, but the existence of those around you, which I find to be valuable and really the ethical thing to do. So the experiment continues. It's not really an experiment anymore. It's just more of a lifestyle. So this is a picture of me on my bench again this winter. I got there and I had to get there on a fat bike in this picture. And it was cold this winter. So I had to sit on my gloves so that my bum wouldn't get too cold. This was a fun day because I actually watched this guy ice fish for about 2 hours. It was really interesting. This is one of my favorite benches at Vermont State Park, just overlooking Lake Michigan. In the summer, this park was crazy busy with people. But boy, if you want to be alone in a park, go in January. I bought a few tools over the course of the winter too. A nice little foam seedy thing so that my bum wouldn't get too cold. I bought a nice pair of thick mountain bike boots so my feet wouldn't get cold. Because I want to continue to sit still outside. Now that we've had the big snow melt, it'll be easier to continue to do this. And it is my great intent to continue this practice indefinitely, because I've seen just how impactful it is. And once again, not just in terms of how I experience this existence, but hopefully how I can be a resource for the ones I love, the ones that I care most about, for my students, for all of these people that I'm responsible for. So I think now it's a good time, Veronica, to open this up to questions and answers. I am going to put in a plug for the book, The Serenity Experiment. Don't you love the cover? My daughter, Caitlin Howell, did the cover work. She's on the call right now. If you want to see more of her artwork, go to her website, KateHowell.com. She spells it K-A-I-T, KateHowell.com. I'm really proud of this book, and I really believe the message is timely given where we're living right now. Thank you very much.